Welcome to another edition of Founders Tales. Delighted to be joined today by Naren Tallapragada, who is the CEO and co-founder of Tessel Bio. Naren, welcome. Do you want to give everybody a quick introduction to yourself and your business?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Chris. And yeah, it's a real pleasure to be here and share my story and my journey as the founder of Tessel. So at Tessel Bio, we're building virtual tissues to design real drugs. So what that means is we're simulating how human organs work in health and break in disease. We're doing this basically disease by disease, phenotype by phenotype, organ by organ, and stitching these together to build what you might consider to be a world model of chronic disease, a computational model that understands where and how you should intervene in everything from Crohn's to COPD in order to actually restore health and proper organ function to patients who are suffering from chronic disease through their lifetimes, right? So that's been our focus at Tessel, looking at all of the things that arise as a result of insult, injury, inflammation, and aging in hundreds of millions, or frankly, even billions of people worldwide, and taking a novel lab-in-the-loop approach that combines experiments with human-derived, patient-derived cells and some really interesting AI-based approaches to identify what we call drug targets, causal points of intervention, where if we were to develop a new drug, we could actually move the needle on those diseases. And in fact, we've already identified one for lung disease that's advancing towards the clinic, and we have designs on really going after many, many more. So a bit about myself, as you said, I'm Naren, CEO and co-founder of Tessel. We've been around as a company since 2022, but really the ideas for Tessel have been cooking in my brain since, let's say, 2010, and perhaps even all the way back to 2007. So I really was always a physics guy growing up. My mother was a doctor, right? She was an intensive care physician, a neonatologist taking care of premature babies in the intensive care unit. And that was really some of my earliest exposure to science, was watching my mother set ventilator settings for babies, like this big, and trying to understand the physiology of the human lung. But all of that being said, I also did my absolute best to stay as far away from medicine and biomedical science as possible. My father was an engineer. I got really into, math and physics and equations and circuits, and I thought that's what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life. So in 2010, what happened is that my mom died of small bowel cancer. That's cancer of the small intestine, downstream of essentially a lifetime with Crohn's disease, which is, as I mentioned, one of the things that we're looking at Tessel. So there's very clearly a deep personal connection there to the work that we're doing, or a deep personal motivation. That's what prompted me to switch fields from engineering into biology, really trying to see if there were ways of applying that quantitative mindset and insight to try to tackle the scourge of human disease and to go after the stuff that's honestly proven too difficult for modern medicine to handle despite all of the amazing progress in science. So, there's amazing gene therapies for diseases driven by a single letter change in a single gene, and it brings a new lease on life to people who have horrendous conditions, right? But for those complex chronic diseases that people have, like my mom, that ultimately drive, morbidity, mortality, and shortening of human health span and lifespan, I think a new approach is needed, and that's really what motivated me to even think about Tessel in the first place. But why did I say 2007? So my co-founder and the CTO of our company, Arvind Dhyagarajan, he and I went to high school together. We grew up in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and we actually took our high school as kind of a fun and weird place. We had a DNA science class in high school where we actually did a little bit of molecular biology in a decaying lab with leaky ceilings. So interesting from the EH&S perspective. But we would joke then that someday we would start a company together and sell DNA. We're not quite selling DNA, but we found a way to work together in the end after being colleagues in high school and in college at MIT, and going through different life paths, mine through academia, his through industry, to converge on this idea of combining computation and biology to tackle chronic disease. So there's a long-winded introduction to me, but probably a lot more we can unpack. And yeah, would love to chat more.
Yeah, love the mission. Thanks so much for setting the scene so well there. So, if you reflect, were there any early bets or sacrifices that you guys have put in that have been pivotal in terms of where you guys find yourself today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to answer this two ways. I think the first is bets or sacrifices that we made. I think the big bet we made in 2022 was going after complex chronic diseases. And from the get-go, we've been saying we're going to go after lung disease, we're going to go after diseases like COPD. It's still hard and complicated, don't get me wrong. But in 2022, people thought we were nuts, okay? Basically, what was very much in vogue then was really targeted therapies for cancers, going after rare diseases. Pharma's not interested in big blockbuster drugs for big complex diseases, is what many people told me. And what's happened in the intervening years, a number of changes in macro policy and the headwinds and tailwinds and all that, sure. But we all know about Ozempic. We all know about Mounjaro. We know about GLP-1s, which really, I think, reawakened the interest in the biotech industry and the belief by people in biotech and pharma that we actually can go after complex diseases and find both science and a pricing and delivery model for those therapies that works to really deliver a massive health benefit to hundreds of millions of people worldwide. So all of a sudden, people are back on the chronic disease train. And, frankly, if you follow the science, if you follow the unmet need where there are patients who need new therapies, chronic lung disease, which is our first indication, right, is, I think, the fourth leading cause of death worldwide. And while other things like heart disease and cancer have had amazing breakthroughs in recent years, that's a place where the needle hasn't budged, right? So we took a bet very early on that if we focused in an area where there's clearly patients who are suffering and need therapies, that eventually the industry and the market and the investors and the pharma interest would catch up with that, or that the pendulum would swing back to that, right? Because obviously in the 90s, pharma was all about blockbuster drugs. That's where you got your statins for cholesterol and all the rest. And I didn't quite know that it would be because of these obesity and weight loss drugs that everybody had a change in mindset. But we knew there would be a moment for us and for our approach. And I'm glad we were early movers in that. So that's an early bet we took as a company. But I have to say, other early bets or sacrifices that were pivotal to getting the company started, I just have to give huge credit to my wife. Just look at what she did. She took a bet on me, to found a company few weeks, or basically to quit my job and start exploring founding a company a few weeks after we got married, with sort of an indefinite pause on making an income and clear implications that if this stuff worked out, that in our married life and in our life as parents, that I would have to juggle a company, a husband-wife relationship and taking care of a child. It's a very daunting thing to think about and something that should not go into lightly, I suppose. And she made that bet and has made several sacrifices along the way that have certainly enabled me to be sitting here in this chair and talking to you about the awesome stuff that we're doing. So it's not just about tooting my own horn, I have to say. It's really important to have supportive people around you to help you, live the full life you want to live.
Sounds like she was betting on you in more ways than one at the same time.
No, she's got better ways of reminding me of that, let's say.
Yeah. Brilliant. And as you touched on, you transitioned from academia into becoming a founder. So what advice would you pass on to maybe others that are in academia currently that are contemplating making that transition?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. So the first is, if you're in academia right now and you're trying to think about what to do next, maybe it's starting a company, maybe it's going and working for someone, maybe you don't even know and you're trying to figure it out. Frankly, that was me in 2019, I guess, after I finished my PhD. I knew I wanted to do something else. I wanted to leave the lab that I was in. And I had some ideas for doing more science, and I had a vague inkling that I wanted to start a company at some point. But, I just as well could have gone and worked at a pharma company or been a management consultant or whatever, right? Academia is a great environment from which to explore career options, because you have a .edu email address and you can reach out to more or less whoever you want and ask them to tell you about their life and career. And people, myself included, like to talk about themselves and their life and career, and find students to be a fantastic, let's say, audience for all of that advice. So you're in an extremely privileged position in academia where you can essentially do career discovery, including talking to people in the biotech and pharma industry, talking to people in pharma who have problems that you might want to solve as a startup, right? I mean, it's one thing for me as a startup founder to reach out to pharma scientists and BD teams and try to figure out what's going to make a partnership happen. But, back when I was a PhD student or a postdoc, talking to people in pharma about unmet need in IBD and where the field is going, the nature of that conversation and relationship is just very different, and you can learn a lot that way that can springboard you into the startup that you want to build. I would also say, I think there's this perception that the company you start has to be exactly what you did in your PhD or your postdoc. And you have to already start working on that project in the lab, and then you have to file a patent on it, and you have to convince your PI to be on board with that. And you have to somehow juggle that patent filing and tech transfer process with writing a paper that doesn't give away too much, but also gives you a backup in terms of a scientific career and a publication record. And then you have to, spend years talking to your university to out-license that technology. And then, of course, the first thing you do when you start the company is to move well beyond the state of the technology that was in the patent, and it's not even relevant anyway. That may be true for some technologies. It may be true for certain companies that have made it big. But I would say, in general, what you gain as an academic, especially if you happen to be in the Boston area, right, is a wonderful set of critical thinking skills to deeply evaluate and select problems to work on and interesting people to work with. And you also get a front row seat to all of this cool work happening around you, both in industry as well as in academia. And you can kind of choose to motivate somebody else to spin out their project if you think it's better than what you're doing. Or you can even just figure out ways to go beyond any of the research that's already being done in academia or in industry and come up with your own idea. And it's obviously got its own set of pros and cons and difficulties and fun points, but motivate investors to back you and I guess pursuing that new idea that may be completely unrelated to what you were doing in the lab. So you really are not shackled to what you've been working on for the past 2 years or 3 years or 5 years. Your biggest skill set, I think, as an academic, especially, let's say, as someone with a PhD, is the ability to think and the ability to come up with new ideas and quickly figure out what it will take to make them make sense or when you should move on. And that is an amazing skill set to have as a founder in the, let's call it, 0 to 1 stage, or maybe even the -1 to 0 stage, right? Where you're trying to even figure out what is the idea that I should pursue. So yeah, don't worry if you're not about to publish a Nature paper in your PhD or postdoc. You can definitely still start a company, and that may even be a better starting place from which to do it.
Yeah. Fantastic advice there. So moving on, you're working at the intersection of biology and AI. So what are your thoughts in terms of how AI can practically be used best within the sector?
I could wax poetic about this for hours, and I will spare you the pain. I think, let me just set the stage by saying a lot of the excitement about AI in bio and a lot of what we call AI in bio today is actually AI for chemistry. Biochemistry, yes, but it's AI for chemistry. It's about generating proteins, and it's about generating small molecules, and it's about generating molecules that interact with proteins in a certain way. And that's all super, super useful. And I think it enables us to expand the space of drug targets we can go after and diseases we can go after, because all of a sudden you can discover some interesting disease relevant biology and actually have computational tools to develop molecules to pursue that and to develop drugs, right? Because it used to be, cool, that's an interesting target, but it's not an enzyme that a chemist knows how to wrap their heads around. So good luck. There's no way you're going to be able to drug that pathway. And so congratulations on the interesting paper, but that's never going to move the needle for human health. So I don't want to downplay any of that. And that's been super valuable. And there's a reason why that's been getting headlines and pharma's been making investments. But mind you, that's also, building on top of 50 plus years of things like the protein data bank and postdocs spending years of their lives crystallizing single proteins to get, really high quality data that computers can learn from. So we need to do the same thing for biology. We need to do the same thing for making predictions about what to even target in the first place. How do you actually move the needle for a disease? What knobs should you turn? What pathways should you go after? Where are there new opportunities to drug new proteins or new pieces of biology that will actually be transformative for disease? I'm a little biased here because that's basically what we're building at Tessel, right? We're focused on trying to identify new knobs we can turn that can actually be disease modifying or reversing in cases where the existing therapies are basically band-aids on symptoms, right? In order to make that real though, first we have to generate a lot more data. We have to generate the right type of data, right? So we need to actually grow mini organs in a dish and poke them and prod them to understand the logic of how organs work. We need to collect a lot more samples from human patients and do observational studies to understand what are patterns of changes in their molecular and clinical state associated with drug treatment. And then we need to build predictive models on top of that, which may not be oracles, okay? In the end, we may not have a magic machine like Claude or ChatGPT or whatever, where you can ask it to do anything and it knows exactly what to do. But you may have something that's smart enough to be a co-pilot to tell you, well, here are some options for what you should try. Here's what we can rule out to save you a lot of time. And here's the direction you should go to actually prioritize the limited amount of time and money and mind space you have to do validation, verification, actual experiments in a dish, or ultimately clinical trials in a person. That is, I think, the next opportunity for AI in bio. I obviously believe it enough to make that the main focus of our company. But I think if we do that, right, we can really unlock the ability to develop new therapies for a lot of these diseases that have bedeviled us for a very long time, where there's multiple causes and multiple ways of fixing the problem, and it's not entirely clear which one's the best and which one's the safest. And we can actually make a dent in that if we start to build causal models that can predict what happens in biological systems after you poke them. But it's a longer, slower, harder, and more expensive process than training a chatbot on all of Reddit and getting it to, come up with funny jokes you can tell in your wedding speech. So that's kind of the trade-off there, but I think it's a worthwhile pursuit. And it'll be extremely rewarding for humanity if we can figure it out.
Oh, absolutely. What's a lesson that building Tessels taught you that you couldn't derive from a textbook or a course, etc.?
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily specific to startups, but it's actually so true that people follow leaders. And I mean that in a good way. But I'll give you maybe a funny example of this, right? I mean, your company culture definitely reflects who you are and what you do and the way you think and the things you say and even all of your little quirks. And perhaps you can find some version of this in a book. Someone writes a book about entrepreneurship and says, oh, the leader sets the vision and the mission of the company. The CEO's job is to keep the lights on and to set the direction for where the company is going to go. And that all kind of sounds interesting and makes sense in the abstract. But then, one day you find yourself in a room with one of your employees and they have all of the same weird tics and quirks that you do when you're sending an email. So the example here is that I have this habit of sort of dictating out loud as I reply to an email. I say, oh, dear, let's say I was replying to you about this podcast. Dear Chris, thank you so much for reaching out. Whatever. I'm sort of live narrating what I'm doing. And the thing is, I picked that up from my PI in grad school. Okay. Shout out to Alon Klein at HMS. Great man. He did that all the time. And I used to think it was really funny and I made fun of him for it. But
I picked it up. And then I started doing it. And then before you know it, my first employees started doing it. And now I feel like half my company does it. And it's fine because there's a lot of other things that spread mimetically like that too, which are really important to setting up this culture of the company that exists whether or not I am physically present in every single room or in every single Slack channel. But something that small, right? Which is like a little bit of a weird quirk. The fact that that sort of thing can spread like wildfire and people will copy what you do, the good, the bad, the normal, and the weird. You don't realize that until you're leading a team, especially leading a team into a very hard and uncertain place where, they kind of hope that even if you don't have the answer, you have a way of figuring out what to do next.
It's kind of learning through osmosis.
Oh yeah.
Brilliant. So in terms of funding and hiring and that side of things, so how did you convince your first investor to believe in the mission that or vision that you've got for the business?
Yeah, I think an interesting thing to consider here is the way you phrase that question, which is how did you convince your first investor to believe in the vision? Our first investor actually said to me, fundraising is a search problem, not a sales problem. And I think I believe that pretty deeply now. I didn't really have to convince him. I just had to find him, right? So granted, there's definitely better ways and worse ways of talking about yourself and your story and your vision. And there's more than a little bit of FOMO and being on trend that drives investments, and you do have to pivot and adjust your messaging depending on the audience, and you should take feedback from folks about what's landing and what's not. All of that is true. However, right, there's something fundamental about what we are doing, which is, hey, you need to go to the trouble of getting samples from people that you then grow into mini organs, and you then set up a whole lab to poke these cells in order to learn what's going on and build models, right? There's a whole approach there, which is saying from day one in 2022, even before the AI craze, that we needed to have our own wet lab, and we needed to generate a lot of data, and we needed to generate a type of data that was not publicly available, and we needed to spend the resources to do that. But we also needed to be sort of thoughtful and methodical about what we were measuring. It wasn't just a matter of give us $200 million and we're going to, generate terabytes of data, which maybe terabytes, petabytes, zottabytes, pick your favorite, ridiculous prefix there. We're going to generate a lot of data, which may or may not be valuable. But look, we generated a lot of data. There's a lot about that messaging, which is big data is good, but start small, measure the right thing, and you need to focus on the biology, and the diseases we're working on are not the easiest ones, but that's where the biggest asymmetric upside is, right? All those things are fundamental to the company. And there are a lot of people, a lot of investors for whom some or all aspects of what I was saying there, did not land and did not align with their incentives, imperatives, internal monologue. And that's fine. That's fine, right? Because we actually found the people, especially for these early investors at sort of pre-seed and seed stage, found the people who actually were in it with us for the long term and believed in us for our big vision and for the fact that we would figure out the right way to pursue it, right? So I think I found the first investor to believe in the vision when I realized it was not about convincing them. So actually, as a very early founder going out in that first fundraising process, I think I spent a lot of time trying to figure out, what's exactly the right way I can talk about, what we're doing to make this investor happy and answer every single question and try to convince them that, that was a great question and that was a great idea and, we could do this and we could do that. Honestly, you're probably better off taking some feedback on the messaging and the strategy and word choice or whatever, but really, really sticking to your guns on what you want to do, and then casting a very wide net and just going, talk to as many people as you can who might be interested and find and double down with the people who seem to resonate within the first 30 seconds, right? That's how we did it, was by realizing that was the right approach.
On the right venture tribe.
That's right. And there really are tribes and cliques and groups of funds, big and small, that move together and that think about the world in a similar way and share deals with each other. And anyway, there's all sorts of fun things about that world, which you
learn about through your journey as a startup founder, but this isn't a podcast with VCs talking to VCs, so we'll save that content for them. They're far better at it than I am.
Yeah. We'll part that one. Cool. And then I know you're really proud about the founding team that you've built at Tessel. So how do you personally spot startup stroke Tessel DNA in candidates when you're talking or interviewing them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a really important question. It's one of these things that I always thought was a little bit corporate or cheesy, especially being an academic before I started the company. Oh, we have our mission, we have our vision, we have our values, and the values probably form some sort of really interesting acronym. Okay, we're still getting there in terms of how to complete the acronym, but I think we really look for three things at Tessel: curiosity, transparency, and resilience. Okay, and I'm trying to make the acronym center, so if you can help me fill in what the rest of the acrostic is, then I'll be a happy man. I've got different ideas. There's two E's, that's the other issue. Anyway, curiosity, transparency, resilience, and more or less, these are the dimensions on which I'm evaluating people. And some people are spiky and really good at one and less good at the others. There's some that are hard to gauge until someone's on the job, but you can understand by proxy from references and understanding where they've come from in the journey to get to where you are today. And then there's some that we just can't compromise on, like transparency, right? The number one thing you need in someone working on a problem as impactful as the life sciences is honesty. Like experiments will fail, science will fail. It's okay. You need to figure out the right way. What you shouldn't do ever is make up the data or make up excuses for the data and lie and lead yourself, your company, the whole field in the wrong direction. God forbid, put something dangerous into a patient, right? So that's uncompromising. But anyway, I think those are the dimensions in which we're evaluating people is, hey, you maybe know a lot about what we're working on or what we're talking about. It doesn't even need to be a technical subject, by the way, right? It might just be talking about the weather, or, tea renovations in Cambridge or whatever, right? Like, when are they going to finish fixing the Kendall tea stuff that's been going on for a really long time? Do you think that that's interesting? Do you follow up with interesting questions? Do you challenge people in ways to sort of get to the root of the answer? I don't have a hard rubric on this, but a lot of those characteristics emerge when you watch people grapple with a topic, especially an unfamiliar one in conversation. Transparency, it's just how much you can get a sense of this in candidates from how they talk about past failures and learnings. There's definitely, I think, folks out there who have this deep desire or have been conditioned into sugarcoating everything that has ever happened to them. And frankly, that may work in certain environments. That may be what some people are looking for. That is not what we look for at Tessel. I would rather have someone who is overly honest and almost apologetic about things that go well, because you can coach someone into having a little bit more confidence, right? And especially a lot of our team is fresh out of academia. Coach them into understanding the differences between academia and industry, but you can't really teach somebody to be honest and introspective. Like, that's hard. And then resilience, finally, right? Science, hard. Complex disease, hard. Startups, hard. AI, hard. Everything we are doing is hard. So things will more often than not work. Things more often than not will be uncertain. Goalposts will move. I'm going to be out there facing the various headwinds and tailwinds of the fundraising market and the pharma conversations I'm having about partnerships and BD and all that. And then, things will go well and things will work and things will need to change and things will need to pivot and then someone's going to show up and publish a paper that undermines your core hypothesis or appears to scoop you. And then a startup's going to pop up tomorrow with a Nobel laureate on the scientific advisory board and $200 million using half the same words you are, though their approach is totally different. And they're going to suck a lot of the oxygen out of the room. Dude, all sorts of things happen, right? While you're building a company, whether you are the founder or not, if you are on the founding team, you will see and experience some or all of that, though it is my job to somewhat shield my team from some of that. But we tend to be pretty transparent and flat. Back to the second point about transparency, it goes both ways, me to my team as well, right?
Yeah.
So you just want to find people who are resilient to the winds constantly changing and ups and downs, just sort of saying, look, there's some things I need to pay attention to, and so I do need to pivot and change my plan and go with the flow. But also, there's other things that I can safely ignore, and I should stand my ground and stick to the science and see where this question takes me, despite the fact that everything around me is chaotic and uncertain. And this was already true in 2022, and now you can imagine how it feels in the world in 2025 and 2026. So that has served us very, very well, I would say. Yeah.
Perfect. And moving on to Boston and the startup ecosystem here. So you're building Tessel in Boston. What advantages or frustrations do you see building in Boston compared to elsewhere?
Cool. Well, let's start with the good. So first, the obvious one, if you're in the life sciences, no better place to be than Boston, right next to Harvard, MIT, and several other fantastic universities, by the way. I mean, we have made great use of the Northeastern Co-op program to have interns in the wet lab who bring all sorts of energy and enthusiasm, but also, frankly, a heck of a lot of determination and fantastic lab skills to get stuff done. Our first RA hire, our first junior lab hire who didn't have a PhD was actually originally our co-op through that program. So, that's great. That's been fantastic. Massachusetts even subsidizes part of the cost. So, hey, if you're a life sciences founder out there and you're looking for really talented folks at a good price to work at your company, I think Boston's just a fantastic environment in which to find that talent, right? It's also our neighbors here, right? At the Indian, where I'm sitting in Cambridge, right next door to me, there's Pfizer and there's Novartis, and down the street there's Takeda, and AstraZeneca's building a new building. Everybody you could ever want to talk to, from big pharma and small pharma and companies you've previously never heard of in Japan and Denmark and everywhere in between, who might be interesting partners for you along your journey, or service providers, or someone to do your mouse work or whatever. They're all here, and the density is just amazing. And the fact that Boston is this walkable, transit-oriented city means you can literally go from my house to daycare drop-off, to a meeting at work with my team, to a coffee with somebody from Pharma BD, to a lunch and back to my desk to work, all in the span of a morning, which you can't do somewhere like San Francisco, where at the very least you have to get in a car and travel between downtown SF, somewhere over by the airport for the biotech folks, and then maybe deep down in the bowels of Santa Clara or something for other meetings in Palo Alto and Sunnyvale and the like. So I think that's a huge advantage Boston has, is both the life sciences centricity as well as the fact that the density here just makes it so possible to do so much. The velocity of getting stuff done is so high. Frustrations. So I would say two, right? One is, I do think that the Boston-based venture capital firms are by and large a bit behind the times. I understand, especially in the biotech framing of things, that you always want to see more data, and that you basically put on the hat of, you pick your number, reviewer 2 or reviewer 3, the person who's reading your scientific paper and says, yeah, this is good, but if you can basically repeat the entire project all over again, but in a system that's 5 times more complicated that you've never set up in your lab before, then maybe you can publish this paper. You do have that impulse, and I think it's a good one, tied to intellectual honesty, tied to the academic culture of the place, tied to, I think, a little bit of even, this small c conservative sort of nature of Boston as a city. That being said, there is a reason why some, to be fair, absolutely catastrophic frauds, but also absolutely incredible generational companies are built in places like San Francisco. It's because there's just more risk appetite, even at the earliest stage, to throw a little bit of money in the direction of smart people and trust them to figure it out, right? I really think we could use more of that culture in Boston. We can talk a little bit about whether or not there are practical or systemic fixes for that. But all that being said, I would much rather still be here as a builder in Boston, because I think it enables you to be close to your customers if you're in the life sciences. And I think tune out a lot of the noise about trends and existential angst about AI. Okay, maybe we should all have a little bit, but the world is not Hayes Valley, San Francisco. Not everybody has replaced their human friends in person with an army of AI agents to, AI agents can't have a beer with you. You know, so I think you know there's a lot that's going in Boston's favor as sort of a quote unquote real place to build. I think. Yeah, the other frustration is probably related to another question you might ask about how the Boston startup community can better support founders. I might go on a little bit of a rant about housing costs, but anyway.
So you've touched on several already. Are there any other local mentors, meetups, resources that have proven beneficial to you guys to date?
Yeah, absolutely. So shout out to my friend Isaac Stoner, who I met ages ago in this HBS class on commercializing science. Neither he nor I were business school students at Harvard. He was an MBA at Sloan, I think, and I was, you know, in the middle of my G3 or G4 year of my PhD and going through that classic identity crisis and slump. So, you know, took this interesting class. So I've known him at this point, I think, for 11 years. Anyway, I bring him up because he is a super connector and runs a biotech and beers meetup group that gets together in Kendall Square somewhere, usually with a sponsor, so that's nice, every month to 2 months or so. And I've been going to those since 2021, basically as soon as I quit my previous job at Google X, was trying to figure out what to do next, didn't know the first thing about where to start looking for investors or pharma folks to get some input on my idea, or even just other people who had been through the journey before who wanted to, you know, grab a coffee and tell me a little bit about what I should or shouldn't do in their opinion. All of those folks I found in attending these meetups and just getting a little bit more embedded in this community that I previously was not a part of. And some of these meetups can be a little bit intimidating and require, you know, having a sponsor to sort of recommend you and all of that. But this biotech and beers meetup has just been the most casual way of getting to know a lot of really cool and down to earth people across the industry. And incidentally, it's also how I got to know even more cool people in biotech by getting looped into doing this Ragnar Reach the Beach relay. So yeah, you might accidentally find yourself signing up for the equivalent of a marathon and to take up running and to be healthy. Oh my goodness, the horror.
Love that. When's the next meetup? Do you know?
I don't know, but it's probably sitting somewhere in my inbox. But yeah, I mean, maybe what I can do is see if Isaac's up for like a sign up link or something like that, and we can point folks this direction.
Yeah, we can put it into to post-ins for sure. Excellent. And then, do you want to talk about housing? Do you want to go on to talk about how the Boston startup community could better support founders, or should we circumnavigate that one?
No, we can go to that one. I mean, look, I'm not going to go on a rant forever. I don't want to waste your time. But here's the key thing, right? So what can the Boston startup community do to better support early founders? Well, let's zoom out and let me just reiterate one thing that I think is a fantastic advantage of being in Boston. It is a great place to be an entrepreneur and raise a family. Okay, it's a wonderful city. I think it's a human scale city in terms of everything I just said, the density and the walkability and the sort of plethora of entertainment options that are family friendly, and I can take my daughter to the aquarium and then we can go to dinner, and we can, you know, there's just this fantastic way of building a high quality of life as a parent in Boston, and to enrich your child with all sorts of cultural and educational opportunities, and to balance that with your own career and your commute, because assuming you don't live 3 hours away, but like me, you live 2 stops away from your lab space in Cambridge on the Red Line, and the Red Line is working, then it's actually, you know, just, I don't think you can beat that. But the flip side of that, and I don't think it's an inevitability, I think it's a result of choices. The flip side of that is housing costs and childcare costs are just ridiculous, and they're getting worse. And I just want to say that everything that makes Boston a fantastic place to be as an entrepreneur, as a young entrepreneur with a family, as someone who wants to make this continue to be the most dynamic place to build a life sciences business. All those factors, housing costs and childcare costs, are manageable. We can find a way to bring them under control, but it takes political will, and it takes, I think, concerted effort by so many different people across the state. And if we don't figure that out, a lot of people are getting priced out. And even if you're not getting priced out, if all your friends are getting priced out, why would you want to stick around, right? So, don't lose that lead just because you take a fantastic place to live and make it inaccessible, even to the people who are supposedly, doing the best within the socioeconomic spectrum of who's here, right? This needs to be a livable city, accessible to everybody, I think, for us to continue to be the fantastic place to build and live that it is. The other thing the Boston startup community can do to better support early founders is probably to get some of those more risk-taking VCs to hang out here more. And there's maybe a future in which we change the culture of investment in Boston, but there's also a world in which, I think Jason Kelly from Ginkgo Bioworks said this on Twitter once, we just essentially have state subsidized flights to San Francisco for people to go and pitch investors there and then come right back to Boston and build their companies. I've been on those 6 a.m. United flights, transcontinental to SFO, too many times to count. And, frankly, it's a nice place to visit and a nice place to meet someone in a blue bottle coffee or something and give your pitch. But then I love to, hop on that red-eye flight back here and be home in time for daycare drop-off the next day. So,
yeah. And staying on family and the fact that you're juggling building out an early-stage startup with raising a young family, there is often a perception that combining those two is not an ideal scenario. So what would your take be on that side of things to others?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say a couple things first. It's not easy. Ideal is a value judgment, but I think, difficulty, we can all agree, it's not easy. But on the flip side, it can be extremely rewarding. So there's a lot of things that have to be true to make it work. I agree that there's a lot to do with luck. My daughter is a fantastically well-behaved 2-year-old, which I think probably helps a lot. And as I've already mentioned, my wife is extremely supportive and, definitely pulls her weight, is able to work her job, but also pull her weight in the family and the household to make up where I might be lacking. But I think putting all of that aside and circumstances and whether your parents happen to live down the street from you or not, in my case, they definitely do not. You find a way to make it work is the thing. And in our case, right, I basically have found a way of, I'd say, doing a couple of things, right? One is to forgive myself, I would say, more often than not. So what does that mean? I mean, I think what that means is frequently, okay, fine. I had to get on a plane right after the blizzard that just hit us and go to San Diego to give a presentation, right? So I couldn't stick around when it was super icy outside, and I did subject my family to some complications getting to daycare every morning, and I felt terrible about that, terrible about it. But it's okay, because then the week before that, daycare was closed for February vacation in Massachusetts, and I took basically the whole week off and hung out with my daughter all day. And the whole example of going to the aquarium was not a hypothetical one. We went there and she loved seeing Myrtle and Turtle. And then the forgiveness that has to happen there is, well, how much did you get done at your job today? Or how much did you get done during working hours? Sometimes you have to forgive yourself for that, for the perceived lack of output, because you will make it up. Aside from that, though, I mean, I think you can actually get a lot more done than you think if you essentially set boundaries, know what's important to you, and you do have to make a few trade-offs. So in my case, always pretty much home for dinner and bedtime and bath time, and I have this protected blocks to do that. I cook a lot for the family, and that's also effectively become my main hobby, right? So you do have to sort of interweave your life and your free time. But also what that means is, sure, I might be doing a bunch of work at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. in exchange for having that predictable and protected time every single day. And that's okay. It's actually fantastically energizing, though I might be getting less sleep than I want sometimes. And I might be going gray faster than I want to be. But it's still amazing because what it means is I can be a present father, a loving husband, and I can do my job. And you just have to listen to myself when, sometimes you have to take a break. And like I said, forgive yourself to catch up on the sleep or catch up on the self-care. But it also means that you can fit a lot more into a day than maybe you previously thought you could. And I think everyone who has kids says this too, right? It's in the abstract before you have a kid. Oh my goodness, it's going to change my life so much. I'm not going to be able to do anything. And there are certain things you can no longer do. I'm preaching to the choir here probably with you. But on the flip side, more often than I thought about, oh my goodness, what's going to happen before I had a kid. Afterwards, now, as a father with both a young company and a young child, I often ask myself, what exactly was I doing beforehand with all of that time, right? I think you do become way more efficient to fill the time available. So anyway, if any of that can inspire someone out there to say, I can do it too, I hope it does. And I'm obviously always happy to chat with anyone who wants to have a little bit of a heart-to-heart about what choices or trade-offs I've had to make or what strategies I've found to make the whole thing work well. It's worth it. It's worth it. But I would say don't do it lightly, right? If you're sort of half-heartedly considering doing a startup because you hate your current boss and you hate your job and you just kind of want to explore things and you have a young child, that will become very stressful very quickly because the startup is a little aimless. But if you've got this deep-seated passion to pursue some problem, you've got to figure out, and you got to scratch that itch, and you happen to have a family to take care of as well, that may be the most powerful 1-2 punch or most powerful combination of incentives to force you to figure it out and stop playing pretend, right? So,
love that perspective, and thanks for being so candid. So finishing off with just a couple of reflections, advice maybe for others. If you could send a message back to yourself day one of setting up Tessel, what would that message be?
Yeah, I think the message is blink and you'll miss it, basically, right? I mean, just like they say with a child growing, I mean, this is a great note to end on and honestly a great parallel with building a company. Just like they say, you look down, you look up, and all of a sudden your newborn is 2 years old and talking to you in complete sentences. Same way with the company, right? I got started in September of 2022 with my co-founder and a vision and some funding from some investors and a vague idea of where we were going to go. A lot of things have stayed the same since then. A lot of things have changed, but now I have 10 people and consultants and a drug approaching, a clinical candidate status and partnerships with pharma companies like Sanofi and government grants and new opportunities up the wazoo and all sorts of people really interested organically from what they hear about the company and what we're doing, interested in joining the team. And it's real. It's real. It is a machine. It is in motion. We are getting stuff done and going places. And back in 2022, I was trying to figure out what's an EIN? My biggest concern was, how am I going to set up payroll? And now, there's so many other things that are my main challenges or things that bedevil me today. But it's just amazing how quickly things can change and grow. And it's only been 3 years, but it feels like a lifetime, right? Exponential growth is real. Don't underestimate how quickly things are going to move, and enjoy it. Enjoy the ride. Even if the startup doesn't work out, the things you will have learned will compound exponentially, even if the headcount or the dollars raised or the revenue generated does not.
Yeah, perfect. What a perfect note to finish on, Naren. So listen, look, thanks so much for your time, your insight, and joining me today. Goes without saying that the mission for Tessel is important. It's a great one. So best of luck to you guys moving forward. Love the fact that you're building with your high school buddy. That's great to see, and looking forward to seeing you guys continue to go from strength to strength.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Chris. Really appreciated the opportunity to chat, and looking forward to seeing what everyone who listens to this podcast goes out and builds, and I'm happy to help anyone in any way if I can.
Perfect. All right, fantastic. Thanks again, Naren. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, bye.